My name is Tim McBride, and I am what the United States government describes as a third-generation pot hauler, pot smuggler, meaning I grew up with a group of kids, guys and gals, whose fathers, uncles, grandpas, and older cousins taught us how to haul pot. They in turn learned from the generation before them. That's how our little organization, if that's what you wish to call it, was born. Born in North Carolina, my dad was 82nd Airborne. He took a job as we got a little bit older in the Midwest as a sales position between Milwaukee and Chicago, where I did my high school years and freezing my ass off. Once I kind of got out of that, I was had an opportunity to work for 2 years in California, in LA, actually Hollywood, for an old timer, and during that day, entertainer by the name of Sammy Davis Jr., who was part of a Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra and a host of other characters like that. For 2 years, and I got kind of tired of that mess. Once the Hollywood bubble burst for me, the movie making and the television, and I knew what was going on and how it was done. It just didn't, television and film just from that point on didn't have the same appeal to me as it did prior. I got done with that. I decided, no, screw it, I'm going to go back. I went up back home to Wisconsin and I was there for, during the summer for about a month. I was there just hanging out, fucking off, doing nothing, when I got a call from my guy that I had grown up with there. It was my next door neighbor. He said, dude, listen, I'm moving to Florida tomorrow. I'm going to go work on a stone crab boat. My sister, husband, my brother-in-law, is manager of the only fish house on the island. He's a local. So we're going to go down there, and I'm going to work. Want to go? And I just, didn't give it a second thought. I said, fuck yeah, man. Hell yeah, let's go. So I packed all my shit up in my fucking Mustang Cobra. And the next day we were on our way down to Everglades in Florida. And we get to Highway 29 and follow it all the way to the very dead end of Highway 29 was on Chokoloskee Island, a little 129-acre piece of paradise tucked away in the 10,000 islands. And he went to work as a crewman on a stone crab boat, which is pulling stone crab traps, and they're a delicacy that's found only in those waters. And at that time, we started out with about 500 or so traps to pull a day, and wound up eventually pulling 700 a day. I came down, and my first job was helping his brother-in-law build his home at that time until there was availability for a crewman on the boat. They had a guy from Michigan on there that the Captain Billy wasn't too sure of. So it didn't take him but about a week to work his ass to death, and he just quit. Because it's must-ass work, man. It'll make a fucking man out of you in a hurry. Well, excuse me. Well, that position opened up. Timmy, come on, get on board. So I wound up being third mate. My best buddy in the world at that time, he was first mate, and Captain Billy. So, excuse me, they impart to me about how it works. You get up about 3, sometimes 4 in the morning, and you get on the boat, and you cast off. The boat's already got the bait and everything that from the night before. We cast off. And usually takes, depending on where we're going, and the trap lines that we're going to pull, because we had traps scattered all over. At one point, the 700 traps, we had there were 7,000 traps. We had 700 in one area, 700 in another area, had 700 in this area, spread out all over the Gulf. And we'd go to one line of traps every day, a different line. We circle back around so they have a good soak on them, it's called. To pull 700 traps, that meant that the two guys on the stern pulling the traps using trap pullers, similar to how they do it on a show called Deadliest Catch. It's very similar to that, but it's not as cold, it's not as busted ass, it's not as dangerous as that shit by any stretch of the imagination, but the premise and the mechanics of it is quite the same. You grab the trap. They're using a grappling hook to catch their buoys, between line hanging between two buoys. We just have a styrofoam buoy about this big with our number and branded on it, and a catch pole. Each of us design our own and make our own catch poles. And mine was a 6-foot piece of pressure treated lath that had, on the end of it, I had fixed a rather large shark hook that I ground the barb off of and wrapped it on there and fiberglassed it on there where I could reach out, grab the buoy, pull the buoy through it, put it through the block and tackle, and around that spinning thing that if you've ever seen Deadliest Catch, you see that big wheel spinning around as you put the rope through. Well, the principle behind that is actually taking like two pie pans and putting them together like this and putting the rope in between them, and it cinches it and grabs it and starts to pull it. Well, to keep the rope from wrapping around and around and around that wheel, a little piece of metal sticking out at the bottom, it's called a knife. It doesn't actually cut the rope, it's just what it's termed. What it does is it grabs the rope, pulls around, it kicks the rope back out. Now these guys in Alaska are pulling, 700, 800, 900 feet of rope sometimes. I mean, we're talking about 5/8 inch rope on these traps because they're 1,000 pounds or better. And they take it and put it into a coiler. Now, our traps are anywhere from 60, 70, 80 pounds, depending on how we're building them. The bottom of them have about 4 to 5 inches of concrete in them, which makes them that heavy. And they need to be that way so when we pull one on board and we take the catch out of it, rebait it, and by the time we shove it off the back of the boat, it has to land on the bottom with the top up so the crabs can still get into it. Hence the weight of the trap being what it is. So I'm pulling 350 a day. My partner's pulling 350 a day. And the traps are set out in what we call lines, trap line. And these lines run anywhere from 15 to 17 miles in one direction. So we're pulling one, I pull a trap, I start clearing it and cleaning it and doing what I need to do, rebait it. When I go to push mine off, the guy on the other, my partner, he's pulling the next trap. He does the same thing, clears and cleans and whatever like that. And when he gets ready to push his off, I'm grabbing the next one. So we're taking turns when we're zigzagging through these traps and pulling these things. We go 17 miles, have lunch, skip over about 50 yards or so, and pull the same amount of traps coming back the other direction. So we're not twice as far away from where we began. Now, as this scenario was imparted to me, it's get up at like 3 in the morning, get on the boat, 4 in the morning or some shit like that, depending on where in the Gulf we had to go that day and how much traveling time we needed. The pulling of the traps typically start when the sun comes up, when you can see that first buoy, because we got a lot of shit to do. We got a lot of work to do, man, and it is ball busting fucking work. If we get to a point where we pull 3, 4, 5 traps, the captain's not seeing the catch that he likes coming out of the traps, he'll say, fuck it, turn around, and we start picking them up. We pick them up, we coil them, we take them, we walk them, and we stack these fuckers, all 700, and then we move them somewhere else and then dump them off and start in a new area like that. That's when work gets fucked up. I mean, nobody wants to do that. No stonecrapper ever loved to move traps like that. But knowing the scenario as I did, my first day on the boat, I get on this damn thing and I climb in the bunk, it's like 3:30, 4 in the morning or some shit like that. And I wake up and the sun's up. I'm thinking, what the fuck, man? I thought we were supposed to be working by now. And I leaned over and the bunks were in the wheelhouse because basically the boat is all deck. You got a forward forward wheelhouse where the captain does his work. That's all the electronics and everything is up in there. And our bunks were in the wheelhouse as well. I leaned over and I looked out and I looked up to Captain Billy. He's got a big ass shit-eating grin on his face, man. He goes, Timmy, he says, buddy, we're not going to pull stone crab traps today. We're going to hang out here all day long and fuck around and unload a pot boat from Colombia tonight. And I went, okay, cool, man, what the fuck? Like that. So they kind of knew what was going on. They kind of shanghaied me out there and with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing going on and said, we're just going to hang out here and go and load this pot boat tonight. And I said, all right, fine, what the hell? They knew I'd be cool with it because, all us kids at that time, most of us were all smoking weed anyway, so we gives a fuck. And, when I get to the island, and you hear the rumors and you hear this and then you hear that, the ghost stories about, all this pot hauling and stuff because nobody ever sees it go on. until you're actually there. And it's all it is ghost stories until you actually get involved in it. Now I had become one of those ghosts. We hung out there that day. 3-4 hours before the sun gets ready to go down, the captain makes a radio call with a particular call sign that boat would recognize to know that the vessel that's about to approach it is the one that should be coming, so they shouldn't have to worry about it. So about 2-3 hours sometimes before the sun's ready to go down, the captain would make the call. We would stay just off of the horizon. And the horizon on the water is typically anywhere between, depending on how big the boat is or how high the boat sits above the water, your horizon is about anywhere between 8 and 10 miles. So we would sit 8 to 10 miles off from the horizon where the boat was not even visible to us. And once the call sign was made and we're ready to go, that's when we make our way toward the boat. And we'd get up there with just enough time to start, unloading and get the load on and get going before the sun went down, so we'd still have some light to work in. My first time ever unloading a pop boat from Colombia was 15 tons, 30,000 pounds of bales. And we got out there, did our thing, and and it was just, there was no training, there was no anything involved. It was simple work. You grab the fucking bale and you run up the boat and you stack it and you run and get another one, stack it, run and get it, stack it, and just, work your ass off, sweating, and you're about ready to die. Excuse me. And once the load's on the boat, we pull away, wave at all the guys on the boat, and head into shore. Now that first night was 15 tons. I got on the boat that very next day after we had gone through the scenario of unloading it and taking it and doing what we needed to do with it. And shore crew did what they needed to do with it. Got ready, went home, had dinner, got to bed early, got up the next morning about 3 in the morning, woke up, sun was up, same damn thing again, only this time it was 22 tons the very second day, 2 days in a row. And I'm thinking to myself, holy shit, man, this is fucking great. I just made, and at this time I made rookie pay. I made $5,000 for each night. So I just made 10 grand. And I'm thinking, holy shit, man, this is fucking awesome. And 10 grand in those days, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, was a lot of money. That's blue collar job, pay right there. If you're making anywhere between, $12,000, $15,000, $17,000 a year, you were doing pretty good. You were middle class. And I just made that in 2 nights. And I'm thinking, holy fuck, this is fucking great, man. So as things went along, and now that the captain understood he had a crew that was, willing to work, willing to do this work and could do it, we jumped right in, man, and this is what he was waiting for. We jumped right in, and now we're working 2, 3, and sometimes 4 nights a week unloading these freighters. And sometimes there was not just our boat, there would be another boat the same size. We're a 51-foot marine management crab vessel, which is primarily all deck, because the boat is designed to haul the crab traps that we work with every day, and by its nature, it's perfectly designed for hauling bales of fucking weed. So depending on how big the load is, would depend on how many boats had to go out there to get it. So we wound up working. Now that I had done the first 2 jobs and gotten paid, I wasn't a rookie any longer, so I wasn't getting rookie pay. Now I'm getting paid according to the size of the load. So my pay now jumps from anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 per night. And it was just, it wasn't like a shocker to me or, like, oh my God kind of a thing. It was just, I was thrown into the mix and it was work, work, work. And it was bust ass, and just, just do it. And how it works is quite simply, we go offshore to meet the load boat, the mothership as they were called in those days, with 1, 2, 3 or other boats, our crab boats of our size, to take the load, bring the load into shore. Now we're on the outside edges of the 10,000 islands, and if you Google 10,000 islands in Everglades, and you see an overview, a picture of it is literally a labyrinth of 10,000 islands, and this was the backyard in which us kids played. We knew the ins and the outs and the backwaters and the changes that occur in sandbars and the shifting of the bottoms, because if you're not constantly aware and you're not constantly running these little backwaters and stuff, the islands are mangrove islands and they grow and they change. And if we get any kind of significant weather event or anything of that nature, the bottoms will shift and passes will become inaccessible. But we always knew this, as kids running out there every day. We knew where all this shit was. So basically, when the big boats come in, they come in as far as the 10,000 islands, and by this time it's 1, 2 in the morning, because we took 2 hours or 3 hours prior to the sun going down to get loaded, and we're offshore anywhere from 30 to 40 miles. Into what we call the shrimping lanes. Now, there was a buffer between where the stone crabbers could put their traps, and beyond that, the shrimpers could do their work because they're dropping nets and they're dragging. Should they get into our area where our traps are, they can hit one of our lines of traps and take 40, 50, 60 buoys and traps and tie them all up into a ball, into a knot, and then you're fucked. So there was a war going on eventually, prior to this negotiation and agreement. But the boats would come in, the motherships would come into those shrimping lanes and sit there amongst, if you looked at this on the radar at night, you'd see 20, 30 miles out, there's nothing really. And then all you see is dots everywhere offshore. These are the shrimpers out there doing their shit, doing their work. Well, our motherships would hide among this, speckled mess of boats out there, so one couldn't be picked out from the other, which was kind of cool. But the closer we could get the boat in, the better it was for us, so that we had a little less travel time then, because what we had to do had to be done between the sundown rather, and sun up. The stuff had to be taken from the mothership, brought into shore. When it's brought into shore to the 10,000 islands, anywhere between 15 and 25 or so of these smaller vessels, shallow drafting vessels. Typically, they were well boats. We were used to catch the bait for the stone crabbers, and they were shallow drafting boats that could, and there were T-crafts that were built, and Morgan boats were built by two local brothers, and we had boats built especially for that could run shallow waters. All of the boats we were using 235 Evinrudes twins to give them enough power, because you put 30, 40 bales on a boat, it's going to take some power to get it through the waters to get it to the island. And take all of this stuff and put it in 1, 2, or 3 of my buddies' houses that we've literally taken the furniture out of and start filling them, start in the back of the house, in the bedrooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, filling from floor to ceiling and all the way to the front door, close the door and move next door to Billy's house if there's still more shit to come, start filling his house. Now, as the houses are getting loaded, there are cars and trucks and vans and, the drivers, if you will, that would come as we're unloading. We would load those cars and trucks and vans and whatever, and they would drive into town, park them in the driveway, go in the house and go to sleep. And the shit's loaded, sitting right there in plain sight, plain view. And everybody involved in the shore crew, now that the offshore crew is done with their job, the shore crew takes over the next day in broad daylight. The minute the sun comes up, this shit starts to go to Miami. Cars would start being radioed, because we were using 2-meter radios at that time that had a 5-digit combination on them that in those days was virtually untraceable. So we would pick several different combinations of numbers to use throughout the day, throughout the haul. If we needed to change, everybody say change, they knew what numbers to go to. And everybody had a radio. We had over 100 of these damn things to make sure people had these, because it takes, anywhere from 60, 70, 80 people to make one job work. And that was the reason why, when stories began to be told about this, and it all finally broke loose, that a small town of 500, just under 500 people, and half the town was involved in it. This is the reason. You can't keep working the same guys and gals night after night after night moving these damn bales, because we're talking 60 to 80 pound bales of weed being moved, 800 of them to 1,000 of them being moved anywhere from 2 to 3 times a night. You take it from the mothership, take it from our ship, put it in the house. I mean, just the handling and the logistics is enough to, you'd kill 70 people if you worked them every night. So you'd have to work 1 or 2 nights and then Jimmy, Teddy, and Willie take a couple of days off and let these guys have a job, have a time at it. Let them work a few jobs, and then he work a few jobs, and everything was being passed around. So everybody was getting into sharing into the work because, like I said, logistically it was a nightmare for to try to keep people, the same people working was impossible. So at that time, once the captain understood that he had a crew that was willing and willing to work, and like I said, now I'm getting paid according to the size of the load. I'm getting anywhere from $25,000 to $100,000 a night, and you don't get paid. And I say typically, but wrong, poor choice of words. But you don't get paid, and this is a very common misconception that you bring the load in, you get it to Miami, and you get all your money, and you get paid. Well, it doesn't work that way. Never did. You bring the load in, whatever size it is. We take it to Miami and say they owed us, or they owed whoever's job it was, $20 to $30 million for having brought that load in. Now, out of that $30 million, the crew gets paid. Everybody from going offshore. Now, the hierarchy of the whole scheme of things was where I worked. Going offshore and unloading the motherships was the highest paying job, and the only reason for that is because there was typically 3 guys on that boat, and those 3 guys have control of that entire load for 4 to 6 hours, depending on how long it took to get from where the mothership was to get it into shore, and that was their responsibility. So we were getting paid the most. Then it breaks down to the smaller boats that come out to get us. They're 30 grand a piece. Those captains pay their guy out of that. Then you have the guy that has the house, you pay him. You have the guys that are handling the bales. Those are 5 grand a night bale throwers. Then you have the guys driving, or the gals driving. Some of the gals get involved the next day during the day. And in broad daylight, these cars are getting run out of Everglades City, making that 120-mile trip across Florida to Miami to a plaza or a strip mall or someplace that's been pre-designated. And the drivers would pull into the parking lots, and we would have a guy from our side working with the Cuban counterparts who actually owned the shit. We never owned this shit. We never wanted to own it. We never wanted to sell it, fuck with it, none of like that. We were what the government described as service providers. We were getting paid X amount of dollars per pound to bring the shit from wherever they wanted it from and put it on their doorstep on Miami and get paid for that. So we would have a guy standing there pointing in the parking lot at that car, that truck, that van, that over there, that's us, that's us. Well, our guys would park, get out, and go window shop for a while. Cuban partners or counterparts would put a guy in the vehicle, take it somewhere in Miami, wherever the fuck they're taking it, who cares, unload it, bring it back empty, and get out of it, and our guys would get back in it and head back to Everglades and get loaded to make another trip. And they would make as many trips as they could before the sun went down, or until the houses were empty. Well, this had an effect on the way things were done, and safety valve and designed in that scenario was that we developed what the law enforcement now describes as a dead drop, meaning we get out of it, get away from it, dead drop it, someone else to take it and do whatever they need to do with it, and like that. Well, along with these drivers making these runs, these multiple runs back and forth from Miami, always somewhere there's a safety valve built in. These people are never alone on the road. And this is actually something I never wanted to do because I was offshore with a chase boat running next to me, which was, a very fast offshore, high-powered, deep V-hull boat that would do 70, 80 miles an hour before your ass even hit the seat. And if something were to happen, or we would spot something on the radar and they're coming toward our vessel, and the captain, this is the captain's job, he would say, we'll keep an eye on it. And our radar was out 50 miles. And as we got closer, we could shrink it down to 30 to 25 to 20, to get a good visual. And if it looked like it was coming toward us, we'd get off on that damn chase boat. Off into the night we'd go. Leave the boat running. Let them have the fucking thing. Because the owners of the boats are never on them. The owners of the vehicles that are being used to take the ship back and forth to Miami are never on them, and there's a very good reason for that as well. simply because if that boat gets popped, the car gets popped, whoever gets popped, our guys on the street running the shit back and forth to Miami would have anywhere from 8 to 10 spotters that got paid 10 grand a day just to drive back and forth from Everglades to Miami, back and forth. That was their job all day long. And they were doing it in staggered positions. Now, if a guy got stopped on the road with, say, a load of shit on the way to Miami, all he had to do was sit there long enough and wait for whoever stopped him to get between their vehicle and that one, throw it in reverse, and plow the fuck out of this thing, because now you've not only got a 2,000-pound vehicle, you've got a 4,000 or 5,000-pound vehicle that's going to smash the shit out of this guy's car. But you're not going to outrun his radio, that's for sure. And he ain't going anywhere. But the idea was to keep him from following you to where you could run down the road far enough to get out of his sight, get into a spotter vehicle who already knows that this shit's gone down because you've told them about it. They would pick you up and take you home. In that same sense, once the vehicle's begun to get stopped, he's calling and saying, hey man, this is it. My shit, my shit's done with. Now the spotters know where to get you and where to find you, but not only that, the owner of the vehicle that's being used is called, gigs up. He immediately calls law enforcement and says, look, hey, I just looked out in the driveway, noticed my shit's gone, man, my truck's gone, my van's gone, it's just, I don't know, it's been stolen. Well, having that vehicle reported as being stolen relieves that owner of any responsibility of what that thing's been involved in, and eventually he'll get it back. Which was a beautiful thing. And the boats were done the same way. The captains of the boats were never the owners, or anybody on the boats were never the owners, where if the shit got caught, which was very, very rare in our day, did a loaded boat ever get caught. But that's how it worked. And not getting paid immediately meant that we bring a 30,000-pound load in. Now that's a small load. That first 30,000 pounds that I did as my first job out there, I never saw one that small after that. We were upwards into the 20, 30, 40 tons. We did 55 tons one night just to see if we could do it, because it wasn't about money anymore. It was just about getting away with the shit, and seeing how much we could get away with. And during that time, that 55 tons was brought in. The crew had been working for, we worked for 28 nights straight, night after night after night. 20 tons, 30 tons, 40 tons, 25 tons, 35 tons, 47 tons, 55 tons, and shit like that. And we're filling anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 houses. At one point, I think every house on the island was full of weed at one point in time because of this whole shit we were doing. That was another reason why you can't work these people night after night, day after day, because it was just, it would kill you. So a small, less than 500 population town, half the town was involved in it for over 40 years and 3 generations. We ran these southern waters in the Caribbean with impunity, meaning that they were suspected of shit going on because, occasionally a boat would get popped. We weren't the only pot haulers. There were pot haulers in Goodland and Naples and Pine Island and up and down the coast doing their things, but a lot of amateur guys would get out there and, they'd get freaked out and just throw the shit. And, that was how the term square grouper was coined, because not every bale of pot is a square grouper. Square grouper is a bale of pot floating in the fucking water. And one scenario that involves a group of guys, and we don't know who the fuck they were, we didn't care, had managed to throw their load, we don't even know how much it was, but it was a pretty good size load, and haul ass into the night. Only to find out that there really wasn't any trouble or anybody following them at all. They misread the radar, or they misjudged whatever was taking place, and we weren't working that night or those several nights. And on our way out to our stone crab traps one morning, Captain, he starts kicking my bunk like this. He's going, "There's bales out there, boys." The minute we heard that shit, I get up, put my crab boots on, and ran out onto the deck with my partner, my first mate, and we look out there, and the sun's just coming up. The water is slick, calm as glass, and as far as you can see, there's fucking bales floating. I mean, everywhere. There's bales everywhere. And it couldn't have happened too long before that, because there were some floating really high in the water, some floating a little bit lower. And depending on how well they were wrapped and how how the water seeped in and wet the bales, we started, snatching these things with our catch poles that we used to catch the crab traps, the crab buoys with, and we literally were able to we're plowing through these fucking things, grabbing the ones that were floating in the highest out of the water, and we started stacking them on the boat. We got to like 50 or so of these damn things, and the captain of the boat said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." He says, "Wait a minute, that's enough." He says, we couldn't take on as many as we wanted to. We could have loaded the whole goddamn boat full of this shit if we wanted to, but the boat coming out to get it from us could only take so much. So some of it we had to throw back in, but we wound up keeping, I think it was like 55 pieces or some shit like this, and at that time they're valued at about 25 grand a piece, these things. So we had a pretty good amount of money that was found money, free money. Boat came out, captain who owned the boat, he comes out in his other little boat, takes this shit off from us, takes it into the 10,000 islands and hides it in a spot where nobody can find this shit, because literally it's the labyrinth that was built, Mother Nature built in our backyard, perfect for what it was we were doing. Once the shit was off our boat, we continued on to our line of traps and start pulling traps. And throughout that day, or throughout that whole morning, we'd have guys coming up to us, because once somebody finds a bale of pot, like we did, captain got on the radio shouting, square grouper everywhere. And anybody on the island who had a radio and a boat that heard this shit, man, they're gone. They're out there. They're looking for this shit, because this is free money. This is absolutely free fucking money, because once it hits the water, it belongs to whoever picks it up. So we're pulling our traps, we're going about our day, and throughout that morning we got boats coming up to us, yelling, "Where's this shit at?" And we tell them, "It's about 5 miles, 6 miles off that direction, but you better hurry up. It's been there a while, man." And he said, "You might have trouble finding them, because they're starting to saturate. They're starting to get wet." And we wound up getting and stashing our stuff in the woods. That's a long story. You read about this in the book. I think my cut out of that, finding that day, was about $300,000 of free money, found money. I mean, it was just ridiculous. So this takes me back to the scenario by which we get paid for each of these jobs. And once it's brought in, like I said, you don't get paid immediately for this shit, because the money that we get paid for having done the job comes out of that load once it begins to sell. So I could be, 3-4 jobs deep into this shit and be getting paid for that job that happened 5 jobs ago, and then the next day or so get another bag, and then ultimately after a while I was getting bags of cash shoved at me across the kitchen table for jobs that I forgot that I had done. It was that outrageous. It was that fucking crazy, man. And the scenario that I learned was that if they owed us, let's say we did a 30,000 pound job and they owed us $5 million for having done that job, or we did a 45 or 50 ton, they owed us $30-40 million. We would take that equivalent of that pay once it reached the shoreline, and we're taking the shit to Miami. We would take the equivalent of what we would get paid, whether it was $5 or $40 million, and send it into Naples or into Golden Gate and put it in somebody's house and keep it there and give them all the rest of their shit. So as they start to sell off their material and we get paid, you pay us, $2, $3, $4, $5 million of what you owe us. We'll send you $3, $4, $5 million of the shit that we've kept behind and give it back to you. You give us all of our money, we give you all of your shit back. The reason that was done was because if you lose your shit in Miami, we're going to get paid because we can take that shit. I can take that shit and sell it like that, and we're going to get paid. And we didn't risk our asses and our lives to bring your shit in to not get paid. That's just how it worked. We had a guarantee when it came to that. But they always got their shit. We always got paid, so always got their money back because we didn't want to deal with that shit, man. That's why we were called what was called, described by the government as service providers. We could haul this, haul this shit and keep, what we needed to keep and still get paid. That was our saving grace. That was our, no problem. We're going to get paid for this shit. But what happens is during that 28-night run, that 55-ton night that we did, now that filled several houses on the island. It took us several days to get it off the island. There was so much of this shit. Now, like I said, during the day, the women get involved in driving. And 99 times out of 100, we're passing the sheriff, and we're passing these deputies, we're passing Marine Patrol and wildlife officers and National Park Rangers, and with vans and truckloads of this shit, just waving at them as we're going out of town because it was done during the day. All the stuff shipped to Miami was done during the day. Hide in plain sight was we were masters at that. And who would have ever suspected that throughout the day, 20 tons to 30 tons of shit's getting moved out of that little 500 people town. They had no idea to the extent at which this was taking place. And I wound up, after everything was said and done with, there were two federal operations that took place. The first one took place in 1983. Over 250 federal agents from every branch of law enforcement under the United States Treasury came down to that little island town in Naples and shut it down and started to effect arrests. But during that first operation, our intelligence gathering at the time was done by the older generations who knew everybody there was to know and paid everybody that there was to be paid, knew that 2 weeks before they got there that they were coming. So it wasn't a surprise to anybody. And when they got there, it was a bit of a failure because of that fact. It didn't turn out to be what they thought it was going to be. So that being said, almost a year to the day, the following year in 1984, here they come again. These bastards came in June of 1984. This time, the older generations knew they were coming and decided, screw this. We're going to just sit on the porches and smoke cigarettes and watch the show. So in come all these fellow agents, 280 plus agents from all over the country, from every branch of law enforcement, Treasury Department, FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Customs, DEA, CIA, Secret Service, FBI, you name the fuckers, and they were there. And they started taking guys. They started taking people in 1984. And along with this operation, besides the law enforcement, came the news reporters. And that was the comic of errors in it itself, is there were more reporters on the island running around than there were people being arrested. It was like a clusterfuck. It was like Keystone cops running around bumping into one another. One of the reporting agencies in 1984 was Life magazine. Now there's a Life magazine, June 1984. It was a centerfold picture of the overlay of the 10,000 islands. And the headline up above it in 3-inch letters, "Trouble in Everglades City," it said. And the subtitle underneath it said, "A small southwest Florida town tarred with drug smuggling and most of its 500 residents say, so what?" And the article went on for 18 pages. Unprecedented in Life magazine at that time. Well, that put the kibosh and put most of the older generations and everybody in jail. And there was about 250 plus people from Miami to Everglades to Kentucky that got swiped and taken down during that operation. But what they didn't understand at the time was that the kids were doing all the work. I mean, The adults weren't out there humping, 800 or 1,000, 60 to 80 pound bales 2-3 times a night. Are you fucking kidding me? The kids' jobs were to do that. So when they took all the adults away, my having had the experience that I did, I was, at that time, I had worked almost every position there was to work, because, I would be offshore, and if I wasn't offshore, I'd be onshore doing this and this and that and that. Well, when you're offshore running these loads and these massive loads in from these freighters, we had what's running alongside of us what was called a chase boat. Now this is, like I said, it's a deep sea offshore power boat that will do 70, 80 miles an hour before your ass even hits the seat. We get on this fucker and take off and let them have it. Because, like I said, the owner's not on there. And we watched the radar from the little boat, and that target that looked like it was coming to us, if it turned and went a different direction, we just pull back over, get back on the boat, and continue on with the job. No problem. We could get away if we needed to. Guys running on the road had the same scenario. The spotters, the 8 to 10 spotters, that was their way out. That was their way of getting, free of getting caught and of getting sent to prison. And in those days, if we got sent to prison, it was typically, 8, 10, 12 months, 14 months. They were given good time. They were giving statutory good time at that time as well. So if you got caught with a van load of it, or by chance got caught on a boatload of it, you were getting, anywhere from, 8, 9, 10, 12, 14, 16 months, of which you would do 7, 8 months out of 14 or 16 months. We'd keep the electric paid, the rent, the whatever, for the family fed, and you get back home, put your ass right back to work again. I mean, that's just how it was. It was, the penalties weren't significant enough to deter what it is we were doing, and the government eventually figured this out. So in 1984, when Operation Everglades 2 took on, and they wound up getting the bosses and the big guys, the visual characters, the ones that they were actually looking for, they had no idea that the kids, us, we were the infrastructure. We were the ones doing the bulk of the work. All the grown-ups were doing was pointing and go, here, do this, move this, and this, and like that, So once these people were taken and put in prison and, going through that route, I had mentioned earlier about this 55-ton job that filled several houses on the island. It took several days. Now, just prior to that, maybe 2 or 3 days to that, we were taking off a couple of days because we had worked, for like 3-4 nights in a row. We did this 55-ton job, and I was off for the next few days, and I went to the house, one of the houses where this shit was at, and as I walked up, here's Daryl. Here's the main dude. He was one of the brothers on the island who were working all us kids. Now, I was friends with the kids, and his kids were working for him. They were working for their dad. He sees me and calls me over and says, Timmy, I'd like you to do me a favor. Well, 2 days prior to this asking of the favor, Daryl handed me and my buddy Jimmy a chainsaw and a wrecking bar and pointed to a brand new, nearly 40-foot Winnebago and said, I want you to go inside this thing and strip it all out of there. I mean, gut it down from the windows down. And went everything out of there. We even took the fucking seats out, the captain's chairs, And when you looked into this thing, you could look up and see the cabinets and the curtains and everything was cool. But if you got up and you looked in here like this, there was nothing. I mean, it was gutted out. They put airbags in the springs to keep it from sparking the fucking highway as you're going to Miami, because they put over 10,000 pounds of bales in this fucking thing, loaded it right up to the windows. So now if you look in there like this, you see bales. They actually even took one out so the driver could sit down in there and drive this fucking thing. Well, just my luck, I show up and Daryl goes, hey, he says, I need to ask you a favor. And I went, oh, fuck. He says, you know what, I need, Timmy, somebody that I trust, and I need you to stay over there with this thing all day long at the stash house, because they can't go to the dead drop spot. It couldn't go to the plaza because you got within 20, 30, 40 feet of this fucking thing. You could smell it. So there's no way you're taking this thing to a plaza, right? So I was trusted enough to drive it straight to to the stash house, and I spent the day there with all these Cuban fellas. You know, they were playing poker and drinking and shit. I wasn't drinking. I was playing a little poker and stuff and just hanging out and stuff like that. Well, they gave me a car to drive back that evening once the load stopped coming, full of money. This is why Daryl needed the trust involved in that. So I, drove this money back. But skipping forward now, I was the only one of any of the kids and the crews of anybody other than the adults that knew these Cuban guys in Miami who actually owned the material. Nobody ever met them. We were doing the dead drops. They get in, park the shit, go, they get in, take it. Nobody ever met anybody. So I wound up spending the day there meeting these guys. So when Operation Everglades 2 came around in 1984 and wiped the whole fucking thing out and took everybody that was anybody visual, 3 weeks later, I'm living in Golden Gate at the time, and I get a knock on my door out of the blue, and I open the door, and there's this guy, Jorge, that I met in the house that day. I spent, fucking around with him. Being the only one that they ever knew, the only one that they had ever met of the crew. They knew my name was Timmy, and they knew what I looked like, and it took them 3 weeks, and they found my ass. So I opened the door, and there's Jorge. He goes, Timmy! And I'm like, George, what the fuck, man? And he goes, dude, we got work to do. It's backing up. Can you do this? And, without any hesitation at all, I blurted up, hell yeah, fuck yeah. So I went back down to Everglades, and I got with the boys and the crew, and I said, look, let's go to work, man. I mean, we were the infrastructure. We were the ones that were actually doing the work, so there was no issues. The only problem I had from that point on was, what do I charge these fucking guys? Because that was the upper echelon. That was the big dudes' shit there. They made the deals. They did all the shit. We just did the work. Well, I learned from the younger of the five brothers how it all took place, what they charged, how they did it, this kind of thing. So it got to a point where I was charging $175 a pound. I would go to any corner of the Caribbean and you wanted to buy pot because I had a connection that was handed down to me from all these generations ahead of me. And I'll buy whatever you want. I'll bring it home. I'll put it on your doorstep in Miami for $175 a pound. Now, if you wanted to go send your own mothership, your own boat to Panama, Colombia, Jamaica, or wherever the fuck you wanted your shit, and bring it out here offshore, I'll unload it and bring it and put it on your doorstep for $145 a pound. There was two different ways. Most of the guys always opted for us to do the whole fucking thing. Fuck it. We didn't want to have any problems with that. So that's how I wound up stepping up, and ultimately my first job was for a couple of characters that I called, their names were Carlito and Leo, two Cuban fellas over in Miami, and I'll just leave it at that. Now, being that we were family and generational throughout this whole process, there was never any gunplay, there was never any violence, there was never any reason for it, because this was family. These were kids. This was all done generationally. And the people who we were bringing the material from, whether it be Colombia, South America, Central America, Jamaica, or whatever like that, they were family and generational as well. And I had the opportunity to do my first job, and Carlito and Leo tested me out with a 30,000-pound job, the very first one. I flew to Colombia on their private jet. They had a corporate Lear that we used. It was about a 5-hour flight. I would get up early in the morning, drive to Miami, get there by about 5, 6 in the morning, hop on this jet. I could be in South America by 11 o'clock or noon, spend the afternoon picking out whatever shit we wanted from the boss man, and that's the only name you'll ever get out of me, was the boss. He ran the area and the growers between Cartagena and Santa Marta, which is basically the whole northern coast of Colombia, including the Barranquilla Peninsula and Barranquilla City. And I was looking at my first time down there. We're flying down there, and we're getting over into the jungle in Colombia, and it's a sea of green. And out of this entire sea of green is this little blank bare spot of landing strip that we're going to land this fucking jet on. And what a wild ride, coming in over the trees, drop down, and it was very, very well kept, very well maintained. We drop in, we drop the jet, go up to the house, and there was a mansion on the side of the hill that his father had built. And it was handed down to him from his father. Long story short, we go and we take and we're looking, and I'm looking at this shit that they've got stashed in the woods. Now this stuff was stacked 25, 30 feet wide, 10, 12 feet high, 50, 60 feet down through the jungle in rows of this shit. And I could pick out whatever I wanted. And the boss gave me a 6-foot bamboo strip, a bamboo piece with a pipe in it, cut at an angle like a hypodermic. And I start sticking these things and taking the material out of it. And I'm using the boss's pipe, and we're checking and we're smoking and we're shit like this. And I'm saying, well, fuck, and how many of those you got? Kick all of those down here, and I would spray a mark on them. There's a reason for that too as well, because a lot of times guys, and we'd even done this, we were sent out there and there was so much shit, so many boats parked out there like a parking lot that inadvertently we'd unload somebody's load that wasn't even ours. Hey dude, that was our load. Well then go unload ours, you know, back and forth and shit like that. So we would mark them, so when the boat got there, we would know that this, by the markings, that this was the shit that I picked out, this was our stuff. So I spend the day doing this, and I could, spend the day doing that, mark the bales, get back on that jet, fly back to Miami, drive back to Naples, and be sitting across from my bartender girlfriend in Naples by 9, 10 o'clock that night. And she had no clue, nobody ever had a clue that I'd been out of the country all day in Colombia buying fucking bales of weed. And then I would buy, ultimately that first time I bought 30,000 pounds. Now, the loads got bigger after that, obviously, after that first time. I would go down there and spend the day buying 30,000 pounds. I'd buy, 60, 70, 80, 100,000 pounds at a time. And then send the boats to go get it, boat after boat after boat. Till that was done, then I'd fly back. And I'm flying 2-3 times a month. I'm flying down here to Colombia to do this shit. So what wound up happening eventually was that, we're bringing the loads in, everything's going great, and I would get questioned, and I got questioned a lot, and a lot of you people are going to wonder what's this kid? And I'm 25, 26 years old at this time, flying to these other countries, meeting these, cartel guys, if that's what you choose to call them. And they're like, weren't you scared? Weren't you afraid for your life and all this kind of shit? And I'm like, fuck no. It was just what I learned as a kid. I grew up doing this. These people trust me, and I kind of trust them, because, like I said, there was never any gunplay, and there's a reason for this. And at that level, and I'll explain to you, at that level of this type of industry, there is no violence, and it's not necessary. If I can take $300,000 of some cocaine cowboy's money and fly to Colombia, and for $10 a pound buy this guy 30,000 pounds of Colombian redbud, and the trip from South America to South Florida, depending on any weather events, significant weather events, would take anywhere from 8 to 14 days. So I've turned $300,000 in 8 to 14 days, and by the time I get it into the United States waters, this $10 a pound shit costs $500 a pound now. I just literally turned $300,000 into $15 million. Minus my fee for a job that size, typically $5 million bucks. Pay me my $5 million bucks, they've made $10 million. They've got their $300 back, $300,000 and $9,700,000 of pure profit in 8 days. You think these fucking guys are shooting at me? They can't give me money fast enough to go back. Get some more of that shit. So that's how the work picked up. Now the loads are getting bigger. They're getting more frequent. We're not getting paid any more money. We're just getting paid more money by volume. So if you take that math and you go a little bit further with it, this explains the reason why there's no violence. Particularly, I mean, the making $9,700,000 in 8 days, if that doesn't tell you, one thing, if you take that $300,000 initial investment, divide it back into $9,700,000, you're coming up with a number of 32. 32 times that goes back into $9,700,000. What that means literally in terms of dollars and cents is that I have now, because that's a 32 number, 32, I have 31 chances to get the next load in. I can lose all 31 of them. All I need to do is get that 30-second load in. They've still made money. They haven't lost a dime. That's the ridiculousness of the amounts of money that are being made and the reason why there's no violence at that level. Because should I lose a load by chance, whatever, their retort to a thing like that is, fuck it, go back and get some more. We don't care. They haven't lost any money, really. I mean, they're not losing but $300,000. Plus, they know they're plus the fact I never lost one. They're always making money. They're always making cash. That's why the loads got bigger. The money got better, and it was never any reason to stick a gun in my or any of my guys' face for having lost anything, because they haven't lost any money yet. That's just how stupidly crazy it was, with regards to dollars and cents. And that's why at that level, there's no violence. The violence begins when the shit starts going up north into Philadelphia, Chicago, Milwaukee, Pittsburgh, or New York, wherever the fuck it's going. And it's broken down into 100 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 50 pounds, and some punk gang fucker is going to spend every dime he's got on, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, or 1,000 pounds of weed. And if he's doling this out and he's not getting paid, you're going to get fucked because you're just losing this guy money. In our case, I lose 50,000 pounds or 20,000 pounds. They haven't lost money yet because we've still got 32 chances to get the shit in and get it right. And that being said, we never lost loads. I mean, there were guys that did. Like I said, we plowed through fucking bales of shit that people have dumped overboard, and shit like that, and free money, and then we'd go party and, do our thing. But that's just how it was. The money was great. I mean, the money was awesome. And the one thing that we were made to understand at that time by the adults, because, kids such as myself, when you're making, when you're averaging, in my case, over $100,000 a week, and you start getting stupid and buying cars and Ferraris and Porsches and stupid shit like the Cocaine Cowboys in Miami were doing, you stick out like a sore ass thumb. You just don't work anymore. I mean, you're done. You start doing stupid shit like that, you're out of there, man. So the adults had the foresight as our guardian angels, for a lack of a better way of putting it, teaching us or helping us to understand how to spend money and not have anything to show for it. And it got fun from that point on because, just to give you a quick example, you could spend up to $10,000. Anything beyond that, you had to fill out what was called a CTR, a cash transaction report. And that's reported to the IRS, that spending. So I'm driving in town to get food and groceries or whatever the shit, and I have a Corvette. We could live pretty good. We could spend some money because stone crabbing is a very lucrative business. It's a bust-ass business, but you're making killer money. So I can afford a Corvette and things like that. And you drive out onto the island, you don't see massive houses built by, guys that are now overnight millionaires and shit like that. You see the typical, every now and then, a house on the stilts who is one of the locals, or, trailers. The island was mostly trailers that were just nothing out of the ordinary about them until you open the door and go inside. And inside, it's the plush Berber carpet. It's the fine leather furniture. It's all the latest electronics and appliances, and you name it, we fucking had it in there. That's where the difference was made, was when you walk inside the house. Well, on top of that, you could, like I said, you could spend up to $10,000. So I'm in town, and I'm on the way back home, and I passed a Chevy dealer, and there's a Corvette sitting in there. It's a beautiful looking thing. Low ground effects and this and that, and wound up belonging to the Chevrolet owner's son. He turned it in to get something different. I pulled in there, I said, I want that fucking car, man, right there. So I bought the Vet. And I'm in my Cobra. And I decided that I'm not trading. I'm not losing this Cobra, man. So I called a couple of buddies. I got them on the phone. I'm calling Everglades. I said, when you guys come up here and, help me drive my Cobra back to town. And as I'm on the phone, I'm looking out across the lot, and I see that they're selling brand new Jeeps, ragtop Jeeps. And in those days, this is the early 80s, mid 80s. And these Jeeps are like 87, 95 or some shit like that. Brand new, under 10 grand. I said, dude, they got Jeeps for under 10 grand. Grab Teddy and Willie and Jimmy and Scotty and Tommy and bring them up here, man. Let's get some fucking Jeeps and go have a ball. Next thing I know, here they come. Here come my boys up there. And with 7 of us bought brand new Jeeps. We take them out to a place called Bad Luck Prairie, and we have one of the most badass demolition derbies you've ever seen in your life. It was a blast. We're crashing. We're fucking shit up. And my girlfriend at the time, she's blonde, a bartender. She's just a dingbat, but she's, very smart, but, the dingbatish blonde thing. And the roll bar in the Jeep, she's looking like this and thinking that it's got a roll bar in it. You must be able to roll it. She's yelling, roll it, roll it, roll it, screaming, hang on. I said, fuck this. And I just cranked this thing. I started rolling the fucking Jeep, beat the holy fucking hell out of it, right? We're spitting sand. We're getting this shit out of our eyes. And we fucked these things up until we got one left that'll get us back into town. And it's doing this. We pull it in onto the lot and fucking get in our cars and leave the fucking thing and drive off. Just having spent, a bunch of cash and having a blast doing it, And then I get caught up with, and you guys bury your money, don't you? Well, fuck no, you don't bury your money. Money rots. Money gets mildewed. I can't remember how many times I've gotten paid with stacks of 20s or 10s or even $5 bills were a bitch because nobody wanted them fucking things. And when you got paid, you usually got paid in a lump like this because this lump goes to you, this lump goes to this guy, and then he gives it to this guy, and then it gets moldy and mildewy and shit like that. Well, and there's a reason why the money is banded in banks. It's banded with paper, not rubber bands. The money we're getting is obviously banded with rubber bands. The bacteria on the money begins to rot the rubber bands and take it over, and then the shit starts to fall apart. That's why they use paper to bind them, and they're kept in. And by its very nature, money is designed to be used, to be distributed, to be handled, to be like this, not kept like in a bundle, or it rots and it molds. You put it in the ground, you bury it. It either rots or it gets moldy or you can't remember where you fucking put it. It's as simple as that. I've had a couple of friends tell stories about that too, not being able to find their money. Well, with this in mind, we wound up having two of the guys' girlfriends on the island, and we knew this Cuban guy in Miami who was a gold dealer. He got we bought a lot of gold chains, and we got a lot of gold stuff from him. And at the time, we were buying South African Krugerrands. These are the 1 troy ounce gold coins at that time. We would send them to Miami with bags with our name written on them and how much cash was in the bags, 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand, whatever like that. They would take it to this Cuban fella and buy Krugerrands, trade them cash for gold. Now you can take these things and bury them, or you can take them, in my case, I had a strong box full of these fucking things, several of them with chains on them. I throw them off the dock where the boat was parked, and if I ever needed extra cash, to spend, I'd dive out there, open the box, take out a handful of coins, go take them in town, and cash them in. That's just how you store your money. I made a mistake after everybody went to prison. I wound up taking over. When George come to my house and said, yeah, let's do this. And I get the crew back together and we start doing these jobs. I start making, money and doing these things on my own. Now my pay goes from, $100,000 a week to, $1 million plus I'm making. Because as a business, and this is what it was as a business, if I didn't have to pay the little boats to come out to get it from me to put it in the house, and I didn't have to pay the guy in the house, I keep that. Whatever I don't have to pay, I keep. I brought a boat with 47,000 pounds of shit on it, 2 of them actually, right straight through the pass and into downtown Everglades City and docked them at the Everglades National Park Ranger Station at 1 in the morning. Because I was friends with the person running the show there, and not only that, one of this National Park Rangers was on my crew. He was the coolest guy. Unloaded these boats and put them into 2 tractor-trailer trucks and drove them straight out of town. And I cut almost everybody out of the whole fucking deal. And I made about $2.5 million in one night. That's how I stepped up and managed to become what I did become. And because there was so much work to do, there was a crew, not only our Everglades City crew, there was a crew in Goodland, which was the next island up, Marco Island, which was the next island up, Naples, which was the next city up north of Everglades City, and then Pine Island. So there's 5 crews working, and sometimes all 5 crews working at night. Because like I said, these boats from wherever they were from were literally parked out there offshore like it was a fucking parking lot. We couldn't get to them fast enough. And just an insane scenario and a way to grow up. And I didn't know any different. None of us kids knew any different. I mean, it wasn't anything spectacular. When I started writing this book, they're like, who would want to read about that? And I'm thinking, I could think outside the box, obviously, when I started taking shit over. I was thinking, well, people want to hear this shit. You'd be surprised people want to know about what the fuck was going on. And not only that, when I started to write this, I went back and sat with some of the older generation guys to get some of their take and some of their stories and some of the background in order to put the complete story together. And they agreed that at that time that if the story needed to be told, and it needed to be told by someone who was actually there and somebody who actually had participated and done this work and could tell it truthfully. And that was me. What they weren't willing to do, and none of us were, was allowing the story to go untold for the next 30, 40 years or whatever. And after all of us pothaulers are dead and gone, some historian or some half-assed journalist would take all these stories and bits and pieces and put them together and come up with a story about what they thought took place. We weren't willing to allow that to happen, which is the reason why I wrote Saltwater Cowboy, The Rise and Fall of a Marijuana Empire, which is also now in its 2nd printing. Books are very difficult to get a hold of right now because the 2nd printing is yet to come out. It's important for me to also let you know that my email address is potholler@gmail.com. If you want to email me at potholler@gmail.com, you're interested in getting a book, a 2nd edition book signed by me, it's the only way you're going to get one. I would love for you to do that. You can go on Amazon. If you're lucky enough, you'll find somebody that's selling a book, that has one, left over that they're selling. And there's an Audible version the story is told by a very cool guy named Wes Talbot, who had done, prior to my book, mostly Stephen King's books. He has the voice, he has the richness and the ability to tell the stories. A pro, absolute pro. There are ebooks. There's a Nook version of this book. There's also an MP3 disc that's available through Amazon as well. That you can play. So all this and this story is available, through Amazon, and there are different outlets as well. But a story that I felt, and we all felt, needed to be told because of what you see happening on the Mexican borders now is not indicative in any way of how the smuggling industry actually started. It was actually started, and Everglades City was named and is renowned for being the marijuana smuggling hub of North America in that day. If you were smoking weed in the late 70s and all through the 80s and the earliest part of the 90s, there's a 99.9% chance that we had our hands on it first. That's the significance of what it is that I'm imparting in this story. It's not a long drawn statistical romp through the war on drugs. It's just me, a simple guy, simple pot hauling kid who went through this and grew up in this industry and didn't know any different. 40-ton jobs were just another night's work for us, and tell this story in such a way where it allows you and brings you in, and it's me sitting next to you on a sofa or on a couch or in a chair or at the table telling you this story, this unbelievable story about the history, the actual beginning and the ending of Caribbean marijuana coming into this country. Because it's quite literally, I had a meeting several years back with the supervising agent for Homeland Security. He invited and wanted to meet a legend. I laughed at the guy and I said, "Legend?" He said, "Yes. Just come and see me and we'll talk about it." Well, during this conversation, he told me about some of the shit that I didn't know, and I told him about a lot of shit that they didn't know. And what I didn't know was that when they stopped our crew, my crew, in 1988, that literally ended Caribbean marijuana from coming into the United States. At that point now, the Sinaloa, who've been around forever, there's nothing new about these people, since, even then. They don't want the Colombian marijuana. They want to sell the Mexican marijuana, which in the early 90s and as such until the homegrown took effect was the brickweed, they called it. Seedy brickweed from Mexico. The Caribbean marijuana, the Jamaican, the Central and South American weed was now going into North Africa and into Europe. What the cartels in Mexico wanted was the cocaine because they couldn't grow the coca plant. They could grow the opium poppy and make the brown tar Mexican heroin, and they could sell their own marijuana. Now, out of the Sinaloa cartel springs the Ariana Felix Tijuana cartel, the Juarez cartel, and the Gulf cartel. They took the entire southern border, Sinaloa and the other cartels. Now they're extorting people. They're threatening people, Mexicans. They're holding families and relatives and whatnot hostage in lieu of them getting these loads into the United States for them. And it was a war of attrition. It was just keep flowing that shit in here and throwing the shit in here, let it get popped, let them get popped, let them get popped, that sort of thing. That spurned the advent of growing homegrown marijuana. Hence comes Humboldt, Trinity, and Humboldt, Trinity, and God, I can't remember the third kind. I'm so lost in all of this, but the Northern California homegrown weed started to come on the scene. They were the first, and that's why in 1986 California became medically legal, and now it was legal for these mom and pop organizations to legally grow their marijuana. Now, what happened was not only did they stop us from doing what we were doing, they created by just sheer happenstance all the violence and the death and the mayhem that occurred on our southern border by taking us nonviolent kids and families out of the picture. So what took place at this point now, and talking to the United States, the supervisor for Homeland Security here in South Florida, was a simple fact that, once he told me the story and how it all changed and the paradigm shift that took place, and he asked me personally, he said, "Now, how would you stop the marijuana coming across our southern border?" And I simply just blurted out, "Legalize the shit." Because if you take that type of demand inability to get the cannabis the way you want it, and it has to come in the way it comes in, and you've got violent characters taking it over and doing it. You want to do away with that? Legalize the shit, knock the wind out of its sails. And I asked him, I said, would you tell me honestly what you consider as far as seizures and successful seizures of marijuana coming across the southern border? Give me a percentage of what you think you're capturing. He looked me dead in the eye and he said, maybe 1%. And I said, thank you. He said, because the stories that we heard as kids growing up about what we were doing, drug interdiction and drugs, importation are down by 30% or 40%. And we're all sitting here, in our homes after having unloaded 40 boats, that month, thinking, where the fuck are you getting this number from? What's your baseline? Our estimates during that time in those days was for every 1 pound that they confiscated, 700 or 1,000 got through. They weren't making any dent at all. They were doing nothing at all until these operations came about. And I urge you to pick up a copy of the book, or even, do a download. Do a Nook download, do a Audible, have it told to you. Have this story imparted to you so you understand the history of how all of this took place and how and why there is no more Caribbean marijuana coming into this country, and why the Mexican cartels got shoved out of the business because here we go. Trinity, Humboldt, and Mendocino County is the Emerald Triangle in Northern California. That's where the homegrown and everything in the United States that's taking place right now was born from. And now, when I was arrested in 1988, I was indicted for having brought in just under 400,000 pounds. I was given 160 years mandatory to life and a $16 million fine for having done such a thing. Now, can you imagine a kid? I'm 27 years old looking at multiple life sentences for having brought a plant into this country. And now, ironically, in retrospect, I can go down the street with this fucking card I got in my pocket, and I can literally walk into a store and buy it. That's how far we've come. And that's the reason why I wrote the book the way I wrote it, told the story and the truth in it as it's written, in order for people who are new to the experience or who want to have this experience. And I don't want them to go into it with the knowledge or have this image in their mind of some poor Mexican bastard whose family is being held hostage in lieu of this bale that he's got on the back of his, he's carrying on his back through the Sonora Desert, literally dying just to get it across there. You show a picture of this poor son of a bitch, and you show a picture of a perfectly graded, medically pruned out, glistening in the sun bud of medical or legal cannabis, and you ask the American people, which would you rather fucking smoke? You know which one they're going to point to. They're pointing to this beautiful looking bud here, because nobody wants to play a part in this. And if you're doing that, you're helping these fuckers create poor bastards like this, So the story that I impart to you is a non-violent way of importing millions of pounds of Caribbean marijuana into this country by families versus the death and the mayhem and the destruction that's taking place in Mexico. I want people to be able to have their first experience knowing that there was at one time this very cool Rasta dude standing out in the field of 200 acres of virgin bud, man. And he's rolling up a spliff in a dried banana leaf, which I've done with Jamaicans before. And, long dreads, just the coolest laid back feeling in the world. Or this guy in South America who is this little Colombian dude and his family, and they're all white cotton, shirt or their blouse and pants and the white hat out there. They're doing their picking and their pruning and stuff and just having, nothing but, a family group setting, growing this marijuana and having it brought in by people who are actually family and relatives and people of alike in the same. There's two totally different worlds going on here. And if people are trying marijuana for the first time, I want them to understand how the humble origins and the nonviolent beginnings of marijuana in this country took place. That's the feeling I want them to have. I want them to have that cool Rasta feeling. I want them to have that little Colombian guy, South America feeling, doing, for their first experience. Not the death and destruction and the mayhem that they've heard about. Because it was actually done that way. And it still could have been done that way had the government not taken it out of our hands and given us ridiculous life sentences for. And you'll also read in the book how I'm able to sit here and talk to you right now. A very particular sequence of events needed to take place in order for this to happen right now. And it could take me another hour or 2 hours to keep explaining, other things to you, a lot of other cool shit, a lot of fun stuff that we did as kids, and there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek and a lot of joviality, going on in the telling of the story. But keep in mind that in the background, it was very serious. I mean, our lives and our asses were on the line, man. The government was out there trying their damnedest to stop what it was we were doing, but it was such a war of attrition and there was so much going on that it was just impossible for them to do that. And with that being said, I'll let you go with this. Some of my dearest friends, even today, are, one in particular, I think the dearest of them all, his name is John. I'll just say John. He was supervising agent for customs during that time, and he was chasing me. We met at an LA Fitness gym about 7 years ago. Just overhearing him talking to the guy next to me, and I said, "Bing, hey, I overheard, blah blah blah." Next thing you know, comes to find out, he shared the front page of the Naples Daily News with me the day I was arrested for just under 400,000 pounds. And then I got a deal that wanted to make a documentary for Viceland, and I said, "Do you know any other buddies around that are, that might want to be interested in, participating?" "I got the perfect guys," he says. He says, John and John. He says, John A was, and I won't say names. John A came from the Secret Service to come down and learn how to run interdiction vessels, and John B came from the CIA, who was interested in coming and running interdiction vessels. Now, those two guys actually were chasing us kids around for 6 years before John even got there. And there's some other cool stories about that as well. But, they turned out to be, really, really nice guys. And between us saying, "Dude, you were just doing what you had to do, and we were just doing what we had to do." And to be truthfully honest with you, and this came out of everybody's mouth, it came even out of the mouth of the supervisor for Homeland Security, that it was the biggest waste of their time and money ever. Because what they did by spending the billions and billions of dollars that they didn't work, didn't happen. Only way it was made possible was because of another particular sequence of events that took place in order for them to get inside our little operation and destroy it from the inside out. That's another story for another time. But thank you very much. And once again, I'm Tim McBride, third generation pot hauler, author of Saltwater Cowboy, The Rise and Fall of a Marijuana Empire. Please, I urge you to have a read. And the book is actually a historical text for one of the universities here in South Florida. And I do lecture from time to time at the university and impart this history because it's something that needs to be told. People need to understand, like I said, the very humble and nonviolent beginnings of cannabis in this country and how it was done originally. And of course there were pot haulers going on when we were doing it. I'm not saying we were the only ones doing it. I will never say that. I'll never take away from anybody that ever hauled a load of pot in this country, that whether it made it or it didn't. Good for you guys. I'm proud of you. What I am saying, though, is we were the only ones that were able to integrate it into a way of life spanning 40 years and 3 generations and being able to do it with impunity and with no violence. That's my story. Thank you.